Vetiver grass has been given in modern times such names as the miracle grass and the wonder grass, but in reality it has been known for thousands of years for the perfumed oil from its roots, its medicinal powers, and for its traditional use in soil conservation. Vetiver grass was resurrected some 10 years ago as an important grass that, when grown as a contour hedge, is an ideal biological method for soil and water conservation and embankment stabilization. The grass is depicted in this watercolor by Virginian artist Anita Cooper. The World Bank established a network known as the Vetiver Network to help disseminate this technology around the world. It is now used in 102 countries. One of the main means of disseminating this technology was through the booklet Vetiver Grass, A Hedge Against Erosion. Over 100,000 of these booklets have been printed in many different languages. The network is now run as a private nonprofit organization from Leesburg, Virginia. Pictures will be shown later detailing the technology, but in summary, when Vetiver grass is grown as a hedge, as shown here in the Philippines, it will reduce soil losses by as much as 90% and will improve rainfall retention by nearly 70%. On a 20% slope in Fiji, a terrace has developed behind this hedge, which at its face is over 2 meters high. The introduction of new technologies requires commitment at all levels, particularly in developing countries. Leaders at the highest levels need to give their support. His Majesty, the King of Thailand, has played an extraordinary role in the introduction of Vetiver grass technology in Thailand, for which he received, in recognition of that role, a bronze casting of Vetiver grass by the well-known Virginia artist Reginald Pollock. Likewise, the Prime Minister of Malaysia has lent his support to the use and research into Vetiver in Malaysia. There are 12 known varieties of the genus Vetiveria. The most important is Vetiveria zizinoides and its many cultivars. Other well-known species include Vetiveria nigritana, found in Africa, Vetiveria lawsoni, found in northern parts of the Indian subcontinent, and Vetiveria nemoralis, found in Thailand. However, Vetiveria zizinoides is the most widely grown, and its characteristics are best suited for soil and water conservation. Vetiver grass is generally an erect clump like grass, with leaves and stem growing to 2 meters and its roots extending vertically to depths of 5 meters or more. The grass is not invasive and can be removed by cutting below its crown. Some cultivars have flowers. It makes a pretty ornamental grass. Those cultivars of Vetiveria zizinoides that originated from South India often do not produce flowers at all, and when they do, the seeds are mostly sterile. Vetiver grass grows over a very wide range of conditions, including soils from pH 3 to pH 11, shallow and deep soils, soils with high levels of magnesium and aluminum, and in climates with rainfall from about 400 millimeters to 6,000 millimeters annually. It will not survive very cold and sustain sub-zero temperatures, although it will tolerate various levels of frost. Vetiver grass, when grown in a contour across a slope, creates a very dense hedge of half to 1 meter wide that acts as a barrier against rainwater runoff. This barrier significantly reduces the velocity of the runoff that enables the sediment content of the runoff to be deposited behind the hedge. Depending on the slope of the land, substantial natural terraces can be formed behind the terraces, which further reduces runoff and improves the recharge of groundwater through infiltration. Here we see on the left a conventional engineered contour bank that actually enhances the removal of water off the land via man-made waterways, and which will eventually erode away. And on the right, a Vetiver hedge system that spreads out rainfall runoff, retains sediment, and needs minimum maintenance. Such technology will reduce total soil losses from over 30 tons per hectare to 10 tons over a 3-year period. In Colombia, one experiment showed a soil loss reduction from 240 tons to 1.4 tons per hectare in 1 year. An example of such research in Thailand shows runoff plots with and without Vetiver hedges. This scene clearly shows the sediment collected in a tank from an unprotected plot. whereas this scene shows minimum sediment collection from a plot protected by vetiver grass hedges. Vetiver grass hedges will back up rainfall runoff, as seen here in an experimental flume in Oxford, Mississippi. The result, as shown here in Madhya Pradesh, India, where a vetiver hedge on a black cotton-type soil has evenly spread water and debris behind the hedge and about 10 centimeters of soil at the hedge face. For quick and effective hedge formation, vetiver hedges using vegetative planting material should be planted about 15 centimeters apart in the rows. These two scenes show the difference in planting distances on eventual hedge density. Vetiver has the characteristic of producing roots at the nodes. That means that as the sediment builds up behind the hedge, new roots are produced higher up, and thus the plant grows with the rising terrace. Here we have a cross-section of a newly formed 2-year-old terrace between two vetiver hedgerows on a 5% slope in Malaysia. The topsoil and sediment deposition is quite clear. In this scene, we have a close-up of the hedge cross-section showing some 60 centimeters of silt deposited over the original topsoil, dark band. Finally, the longitudinal section through a hedge is shown here, depicting a massive root structure that not only holds the plant in place, but also binds the soil when used for embankment stabilization. A few other characteristics of vetiver include its very strong stem and leaf structure. In this scene, the hedge has stopped an enormous boulder that has fallen onto the road off a steep hillside and has prevented the boulder from moving further down the slope. Vetiver is extremely tolerant of fire. These scenes show the recovery of vetiver over a 4-week period following an intense fire. Vetiver can be induced to spread over a complete embankment slope by layering, thereby causing root formation at the nodes on the stem of the plant. For those cultivars that produce flowers, vetiver is generally non-competitive with adjacent crops. In this scene from Colombia, we see from the bottom histogram that there is very little yield loss in the cassava planted between vetiver hedges, whereas the top histogram shows substantial losses of cassava yield when planted between hedgerows of Napier grass. The latter has spreading and competitive roots. Quantitative measurements indicated a 30% lower cassava yield in the plots with Napier hedges. Although vetiver can be grown from seed, if the variety produces fertile seeds, it is not recommended, since it is important to avoid using cultivars that have potential invasiveness. Also, it is difficult to establish plants in the field from seed. Planting material for vetiver grass hedges is derived from subdividing clumps of vetiver into slips. Normally, 3 slips are planted at each planting station. This is known as bare root planting. Under special circumstances, containerized plants can be used. Planting slips have to be multiplied in nurseries, and the success of any vetiver program will be found in the quality and output of the nurseries that are developed. Where possible, nurseries should be sited on good loamy sand soils, with supplementary water available for irrigation. Under tropical conditions and under good management, a nursery should be able to produce 3 crops a year, 15 slips a station, with stations at 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, 39,000 stations per hectare, which equates to about 500,000 slips per crop, or 1.5 million per year. The following scenes show bare root nurseries in California, Ethiopia, and India, and a containerized nursery in India. Dr. P.K. Yoon of Malaysia has developed a technique of growing containerized plants in foam rubber, which not only produces better root growth after field planting, but makes transportation much easier because of their lightness and no spill factor compared to earth-filled pots. After the removal of plants from the nurseries, better field survival rates will be obtained if the plant material is kept in the shade and under moist conditions. In Thailand, planting slips are often kept under a polythene tent. In any event, a general rule of thumb should be to plant in the field within 24 hours of lifting from the nurseries. Plant material is best trimmed in the nursery thus saving transportation costs. However, often it is trimmed in the field, sometimes using fresh plant material dug from standing hedges or nurseries at site. This process is shown in Ethiopia and India. Vetiver is generally planted on the contour at about 2 meters vertical interval, VI, and in a small furrow either dug by hand or by plow, or along the edge of an existing terrace, as shown here in Ethiopia. The slip should be firmly pressed into place and should not be planted too deep. Vetiver hedges have been used by farmers in the Gundalpet district of South India for perhaps hundreds of years. They have proven most effective in reducing soil losses, improving crop yield and groundwater, and providing fodder for livestock. The sugar industry has used the system since the beginning of the century. This farm in Natal, South Africa knew about Vetiver for 70 years, but never used it for soil conservation. Thanks to the Vetiver network, the farm is now fully conserved using Vetiver. This 15-month-old hedge in Malaysia is a superb example of the morphology of a good quality Vetiver hedge. Note the denseness and compaction. Vetiver hedges, if topped regularly, as in this scene, provide useful fodder for all classes of livestock. Vetiver hedges are used in many countries. In Zambia, in Malawi in association with maize and tea, in South Africa in association with sugar and bananas, in Zimbabwe with coffee, in China with rice and beans, in Queensland, Australia with sorghum and cotton, in Costa Rica with coffee, in Thailand with upland crops, and in Indonesia with vegetables. In Fiji, Vetiver has been used since the 1950s, and this scene shows how a natural terrace has been built up behind a Vetiver hedge. The face of the terrace riser is about 2 meters vertical height. Another scene from Fiji shows Vetiver protecting the foot of a field adjacent to a highly saline drainage area. The following scene showed the sequential protection of a very steep site, slopes up to 60% in Malaysia, that over a 70-week period was fully conserved using Vetiver, containerized planting material. Vetiver grass hedges are ideal for protecting deep cracking vertisols, as shown in Queensland and Madhya Pradesh, India. In Ethiopia, NGOs are introducing Vetiver hedges to small farmers. These scenes show the sequential growth and crops of a small mixed farming situation in the Ethiopian highlands at 2,000 meters altitude and a rainfall of 1,200 millimeters. Vetiver is an ideal protective system for much of Ethiopia and sub-Sahara Africa. In Thailand, there's good evidence that when Vetiver hedges are planted around individual fruit trees, there's an increased growth and yield due to better moisture conditions and possibly an improved nutrient situation. In Australia, this Vetiver hedge grown on the Darling Downs of Queensland appears to be having a minimal impact on the immediate row of sorghum. Vetiver hedges have the potential on these floodplains to allow a further 30% of the total land to be brought into production. In Central America, where legumes and maize are key crops, there's a huge potential of introducing Vetiver grass hedges into the system. On this steep slope in Costa Rica, an established Vetiver hedge is in harmony with the adjacent legume and allows that legume to better establish from whence it can grow back up the hill. Vetiver hedges have proven very effective for the rehabilitation of barren lands and for gully control. In this scene from southern China, all the A and B soil horizons have been eroded away from this highly acidic and aluminum toxic site. Moisture retention is extremely poor and virtually no vegetative growth is possible. Using Vetiver hedges, rainfall runoff is slowed down and indigenous grasses and shrubs are able to establish. Here, in an area known as the Red Desert, Vetiver hedgerows and trees were planted. The upper picture shows the before scenario. The lower shows the impact 2 years later. The key is moisture retention that allows other plants to grow. A similar situation on the granite hills behind Hong Kong Airport shows the impact of vetiver hedgerows on the growth of Acacia mangium that was planted just after the vetiver hedges. The vetiver has slowed down runoff and assured the growth of these fire-resistant trees. In Vietnam, vetiver grown simultaneously with a young eucalypt plantation has significantly reduced runoff and has enhanced tree growth as well as ground litter cover. In India, sodic soils found in the state of Uttar Pradesh have been completely rehabilitated with the use of vetiver grasses. In Malaysia and South Africa, vetiver has been used on very hostile sites to stabilize mine dump sites. Vetiver, with its strong and dense leaf and stem system and deep roots, is an ideal plant for stabilizing gullies. For gully protection, it is important to protect the foot of the gully bank, as this is the main area of cutback. Soil slipping down the gully face will be trapped by the vetiver, and eventually a natural angle of repose will be developed. Here in South Africa, a gully has been completely stabilized after 3 years of using vetiver. In India, vetiver has been used to back up stone gully checks that eventually always wash away. And in this scene can be seen a stabilized gully area in its entirety. In Australia, vetiver is used for stabilizing a gullied area in black soils and a drain in a rocky quarry to reduce sediment flows to the quarry's reservoir. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, the U.S. Army is testing vetiver to stop sediment flows due to heavy tank traffic on its training grounds. This scene is typical of the use of vetiver on ephemeral streams in arresting sediment flows. In this last scene of the group, we see a stabilized gully in Fiji. Vetiver hedges were planted 30 years previously. They have remained where planted and are healthy and still doing the job that they were intended to do. Vetiver, with anatomical characteristics of swamp grass, a hydrophyte, grows very well in association with water. We know of instances where vetiver has been totally submerged for 3 months, and once the water recedes, the vetiver is found to be intact and will start growing vigorously again. This scene in Bangladesh depicts the use of vetiver to protect the edge of a farmer's field next to a river. Everything is flooded, and yet the vetiver remains well established along the edge of the submerged riverbank. In Bangladesh, vetiver, unknown to many officials, is fairly common alongside canal and riverbanks, and, as can be seen in this scene, is an effective protector of the bank of this watercourse. Note, because vetiver is thick and strong and shock absorbent, it has good potential for reducing bank damage by wave action caused by passing boats. In China, vetiver has been used to support diversion banks located on riverbeds in order to better control flood flows and riverbed damage. Most drainage ways, whether natural or man-made, eventually become serious gullies unless properly protected. In South Africa, biological use of vetiver in the form of spurs and crosshedges have fully stabilized a major drainage way on this sugar farm. At a site in Louisiana, vetiver grass is shown to arrest sediments on an ephemeral stream. In Fiji, this drainage line field interface has been stabilized with vetiver. Vetiver is also very effective in stabilizing banks of ponds and dams, as well as spillways. In this scene, we see a small interfield spillway in India stabilized with vetiver, using traditional farmer-developed ideas. And below, we see vetiver used in South Africa to stabilize the concrete interface of a spillway, as well as stabilizing the waterway below the spillway. In Thailand, China, India, Puerto Rico, and elsewhere, vetiver has been used very effectively for fish pond bank stabilization. In China, the fresh green leaves of the grass are fed to grass carp. Roadside stabilization is not easy in the best of times, and when government budgets are insufficient, roadsides tend not to be maintained, resulting eventually in the collapse of the road. Here we see an experiment on a very unstable embankment in Malaysia. Vetiver hedges were tested alongside a local grass, and it's quite clear how well the vetiver has established and stabilized the bank in less than a year, compared to the local elephant grass, which was hardly established, and where there is a huge amount of rilling taking place. Vetiver has been used in many parts of the world to stabilize low-cost roadsides. Such scenes as these in Trinidad, South Africa, Fiji, New Zealand, and Malaysia are not new, but neither are they common. Road engineers tend to prefer physical structures, and only more recently are turning to biological systems. Vetiver is probably the best of the biological methods. Vetiver can be used to protect culverts on roadsides, as well as the disposal drains, as depicted in this scene from a Malaysian plantation road. In this montage, the vetiver hedges are used to stabilize high cuts in Thailand, to reduce silt and rubble deposition in roadside drains. Note how clean the drain appears to be, and lacks any of the sediment so often found in drains below cuts, and alongside a provincial road in northeast Brazil. In Malaysia, Dr. P.K. Yoon has demonstrated on a large scale that vetiver can be used very successfully to stabilize very steep and high, 60 meters, expressway embankment fills and associated drainage systems. In Malaysia, the most common system for embankment stabilization is to use hydroseeding techniques. These often fail under very hostile site conditions that govern these highways. The key to successful stabilization using vetiver is to use high-quality planting material, containerized foam rubber raised plants, define and implement proper standards, good supervision at planting, and follow-up maintenance in the first few months. If poor quality methods are applied, the technology won't work, and we end up with scenes such as these. The following scenes provide a glimpse of the technology. Plant material is head-loaded to the site after careful transportation and handling from the nursery. Plants are planted in small furrows cut on the contour across the face of the embankment. Vetiver quickly establishes, and the following scenes show various aspects of the stabilization of this steep 600-meter-long embankment. Just as important as embankment stabilization is the stabilization of the main drainage way at the foot of the embankment and the protection of the upstream catchment and approaches. The cross-section of a 26-week vetiver hedge on this embankment shows why vetiver is such a good stabilizer. The roots have penetrated up to 5 meters. The overlay fill into the original parent slope material. Note the old tree roots in the parent material, thus binding the soil and different layers together. The hedge itself will reduce water flow velocities down the slope by spreading out the flows and allowing a more gradual flow to the bottom or cutoff drains, thus preventing rilling and gullying and eventual collapse. Vetiver grass is most famous for the production of an aromatic oil extracted from its roots. This oil is used primarily by the perfume industry. The market for the oil is volatile and prices are extremely elastic. If supply exceeds demand, prices tumble. Indonesia has produced oil of vetiver using old and inefficient distillation processes. More efficient ones are being used elsewhere, as in the case of this one in Vietnam. Vetiver grown for the oil is best grown on very light sandy soil to enable easy and deep extraction of the roots. Knowing the impact of vetiver hedges, it would be best to grow the roots for harvesting between the vetiver hedgerows in order to minimize the inevitable erosion that occurs with the digging process. Prior to distilling, the harvested roots are normally stored as bales. Vetiver leaves make an excellent mulch, as in an Ethiopian coffee plantation and a lychee orchard in China. The mulch is long-lasting and very effective in reducing in-situ erosion and moisture losses. Vetiver leaves also make an excellent thatch, as in the case of this shed in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, the leaves and the roots are used to fill mattresses. Since insects generally stay away from vetiver, the mattresses are fairly free of bugs. Vetiver can be fed as good forage if cut regularly before the leaves mature. Young, fresh leaves have similar feed value to Napier grass. Vetiver can be used to stabilize embankments associated with housing sites. This application should be greatly expanded and would be particularly useful in areas that are prone to land slippage and erosion.